So, welcome to GTV. I'm Hugh Dubrulle. I am with Joe Borges, and Jared Green is behind the camera, and we are going to be bringing you the Goffstown High School Varsity Boys Soccer Preseason Show. I said that without a mistake. Isn't that incredible? But before we get any further, I need to ask Joe a couple of questions. Joe, I need you to tell me, where are we? Tell the good people of Goffstown where we are right now.
So we're at my favorite eating hole in Goffstown, Putnam's. And the best thing on the menu, they don't have it all the time, is the Cajun seafood chowder, by far.
Okay, I was going to ask you what the best thing on the menu was. Like, if I didn't know anything and I was here for the first time and I was out of town, what should I get?
If that special's on the board, I would get that.
Okay, so say I am watching my girlish figure, or my pancreas is kind of like the consistency of toothpaste. Like, what should I get that would be a little bit lighter?
A little bit lighter.
You don't go to that part of the menu.
I stay away from that part. As you can see, I stay away from that part of the menu.
All right, well, I just have to navigate that part by myself. Okay, so so we should probably leave this behind and talk a little bit about the season. So what the pregame show is going to consist of is we're going to recapitulate what happened last season at varsity and JV. Then we're going to talk about who graduated, who's still on the team, and who has joined the team from JV. And then finally, what Division I holds in store for Goffstown High School. So start with a recapitulation of last year for varsity. Varsity went 7-8-1, and if you actually look at the wins and the losses, you probably might have cause not to be terribly impressed with Goffstown. But I think that kind of conceals something special about that team last year, and that was that this was a team that got up for the really, really tough games and couldn't care less about the mediocre teams that they played. So you think of games where they beat Lebanon in overtime, or they lost to John Stark in overtime, or they beat Merrimack Valley in overtime. Those kinds of games, they were really, really tough, and they cared a lot. And then there were the other games, right? I'm thinking primarily like that Co-Brown loss. We lost to Co-Brown 4-1, and Co-Brown was a really mediocre team. I mean, no offense, I think they finished 14th, 15th in the division. And if I hadn't been at that game, I would not have known what had happened there. So the team finished 7-8-1. They squeaked into the playoffs. They were a number 13 seed. But the good thing is, if you're a team that gets up for the big games, you get into the playoffs, every game's a big game. Right, they're absolutely ready. And so what happened is, the very first game, they played number 4 Hollis Brookline, which I believe was 11-4-1, much better record. And we beat them. We went out early, and we really had the upper hand for most of that game, came away with victory. I believe that was the only game in the first round of the playoffs in which a lower seed beat a higher seed. So kudos to Goffstown for that. We went on to play Lebanon in the next game. Lebanon, I believe, was also 11-4-1 or somewhere thereabouts. They were number 5. We had beaten Lebanon in the regular season. We had beaten them in the state championship the year before, but we had not beaten them in Lebanon in ages, as I understand. Years, right? So we went up into Lebanon. We went into unfriendly territory. Certainly, I don't think the referees were friendly. As always seems to be the case. But Goffstown went ahead, actually, in the 25th minute. Lebanon came back in the second half and scored, and then the game really opened up, and it was all over the place. Both teams struggling valiantly, trying to avoid overtime. They could not. However, 5th minute overtime, David Gibson put a header up in the upper right-hand corner. Goffstown wins. Lebanon has to go home and take a shower, and we were off to the semifinals. And kind of interesting about the semifinals, who's left in the semifinals? Number 1 Wyndham, number 2 Pembroke, number 3 Bow, and number 13 Goffstown. So
right where we belong.
Right? Yeah, but it kind of gave me the impression that Goffstown was actually a number 4 team masquerading as a number 13 team for much of the season. However, Wyndham, the Cinderella story came to an end. Wyndham was older, larger, stronger, faster, more skilled, and they won that game fair and square, 4-0, and so that was the end of the season. But I do believe that deep playoff run really kind of redeemed what was a pretty blah regular season.
I'd also say, though, the strength of schedule was tough for Goffstown.
Yeah.
They played a much tougher schedule, and so even though they played a higher seed team like Hollis didn't play the same strength of schedule that Goffstown did. So
you are absolutely right.
I think sometimes those seedings can be a little bit misleading because of who you play.
But you lose to Kearsarge, you lose to Co-Brown, you
Right.
barely beat West. I mean, it's like, so I get what you're saying, but, this is a team that had kind of a weird psychology. However, JV had a really good season. I think it's worth talking about because a large number of the guys who are on the team this year were on JV last year, so I think it makes sense to kind of see where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I think for the JV team last year, and obviously it's JV, but they were coached by Coach Ellis, who played for Coach Lovren in the past, and so they kind of played the way Randy wants to play, and they ended up being 13-2 for the season, and they lost. The 2 games they lost were both in overtime, and so they were competitive. In most of the games, they won by a lot. They scored a lot of goals. The team played well. More importantly, I think, and especially for this year, Coach Ellis played people at a lot of different positions.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't set in one position. So you had people that were playing defense. They'd play defense and mid. Your mids played mid and forward. And some players played everywhere, depending on when players were moved up or what was going. So it was a very successful season with a lot of contributions from a lot of players, and a lot of those players that were juniors last year and one sophomore, sophomores last year and one freshman, are all moving up to the varsity team this year. So it was actually a fun season to watch, very competitive, and the talent was better than the other Division II teams that we played. But sometimes the level at JV isn't quite as strong.
Well, I think what you're saying, though, about Tyler Ellis shuffling kids around a bit is really important because certainly this season on varsity, people are getting shuffled around a lot. I mean, we did see a lot of players get shuffled around last year, but already in the preseason, we've seen a lot of people get moved around to positions that they might not be entirely familiar with, and I think that adaptability is really, really important.
And I think they all played those positions, not just filling in. They played them for extended periods of time. So they were able to get a little bit of an understanding of what you're looking for. A little different formations this year, but I think for the players, it was very good. You didn't just have a back that only played back. They played everywhere.
Right. No, and that's good because as we're going to see with the lineup for this year, things are changing a lot from last year, and people are getting moved around to fill a number of holes this season. So that, I guess, brings us to this year, and I think what we're going to do is kind of work our way from the top all the way down in terms of lineup and see who's playing where. So we might as well start with the strikers. Last year we had David Gibson and Nick Mason playing up top for Goffstown, and that was a really pretty effective combination at times. This year instead, though, we're going to have David Gibson probably at least starting out the season with Matt Fleming, and that's kind of a different look. David Gibson, kind of an interesting season last year in that this was a guy who was kind of a bridesmaid but never a bride. He had a lot of assists, created a lot of opportunities for people, didn't score a whole lot of goals. In fact, he only scored 1 goal in the regular season, and that was against Milford, whom we obliterated 6-0. We sleptwalked through that game, and David Gibson scored a goal. But Coach Lovering stuck with David Gibson, and that proved to be a really inspired decision because when the playoffs rolled around, David Gibson turned into Mr. October, and depending on how you count the goals, he scored either 4 goals or 3 goals, which were almost all of our goals in the playoffs. And if you go on Goffstown or Goffstown TV YouTube and you take a look at some of those goals, I think it gives you a very good impression of what David Gibson is like.
Right.
He's very strong, he's very big, he's very physical, but he's very opportunistic. And he puts relentless, sort of implacable pressure on opposing defenses. I think a lot of the weaker, less experienced defenses that we come up against are really going to kind of find this very, very uncomfortable dealing with David Gibson because he's got speed, he's got strength, he pressures the ball, he does all kinds of stuff like that, and he does not stop. So I think that's going to be interesting. Matt Fleming, also an interesting story with him. He was on varsity last year. He didn't play a single minute, didn't play a single game. He was in an ATV accident before the season started. We have gotten a chance to see him play in the spring and the summer and a little bit, now. And I think what you get with Matt Fleming is a lot of speed. I think you get a lot of aggression. You get some moves. I think, though, you also get a guy who is determined to press, not like develop like some long, slow possession. We're not talking about Spanish soccer here, or like 900 passes in a game like in the World Cup. You're talking about a guy who's just going to push and push the tempo of play really, really, really high. And between him and Gibson, I think sometimes that doesn't work. but I think a lot of teams are going to find it very difficult to deal with that, and I think they're going to be kind of uncomfortable with this kind of relentless pressure from the two of them. However, those are not the only two guys who are necessarily going to be playing offense. Those look to be the starters right now, but we have a number of guys coming up from JV from last year who will be getting some time up there too, and you should probably tell us about them.
Yeah, so I mean, there are two of them that played a lot of forward for the JV team last year and had a lot of success. Kyle Pernard probably averaged over 3 goals a game. I mean, now obviously it's against JV competition, and he was generally faster than any defender the other team could throw out there, and so he could run by guys. And you're not going to be able to do that at the varsity level, and definitely not at the Division I level.
No.
But he showed a lot of touch of putting a lot of balls on net. Which, when we coached him 100 years ago, that was always a little more of a challenge.
Touch and go, right? Yeah, exactly.
But he in the few games that we've seen so far, the Jamboree, he's got some shots on goal. So he's got great speed. He hustles a lot, and I think when they're looking at rotating guys up there because they're covering such a big part of the field, you know, they're going to want to be moving people in, and when they move Kyle in, I think he's going to give them a good opportunity to score. Nicholas Martin is the other forward that has a very good soccer skills. So he's he really is a soccer player. He knows how the game's played. He knows when to play back, when not to play back. It's not always 100 miles an hour forward, which I think on this team is really important because there's not going to be a lot of guys up front.
Right.
And so, you know, being smart, spreading out is really going to be a big part of his game. So I think those two in particular, I think are going to get a real positive influence when they get subbed into the games, or, you know, if they're starting a game, depending on what the formations are. But I think they're going to bring a lot to the table.
Well, you know, we haven't always had a huge amount of depth at striker in the last couple of years, and I think now we probably have a little bit more depth. I thought it was like, I remember last season when we were reporting the varsity games, and we would get the text messages from people, you know, reporting about what was going on the JV field, and it was absolutely crazy, you know, like Kyle Pernard, you know, hat trick. Kyle Pernard, a brace. Kyle Pernard, 2 braces. You know, we were trying to figure out, like, what do you call it when somebody gets 5 goals? You know, the crazy stuff like that. So that was really, really impressive. But I have to say I'm also really impressed with how much Nick Martin has developed in the last couple of years, because he's always been tough. He's always been strong. He's always been pretty fast. But now he's making better decisions. It's not always like, you know, 100%, you know, in every direction. I mean, he stops, he thinks, he makes good decisions.
And he's bigger.
And he's bigger. No,
honestly,
he's always been a strong kid, and he's always been a tough kid. But I think he has a lot to contribute to Goffstown in the future. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. So that brings us to the midfield, and what we're talking about is not even like a remodel. I don't know, what do you call it when you take an entire house down to the studs and then like rebuild it? Last year we had Mike Fortin and we had Noah Sharon playing in the midfield. I mean, those two guys were not just the backbone of the midfield; they were the backbone of the entire team practically.
And all playing at the next level at this point.
And all off playing college right now. You know, both of them were GPS NPL players. I mean, they were really superior talents. Mike Fortin was the sort of dynamo of the offense. Noah Sharon was the guy who could just do everything. You know, he could pass, he could shoot, he could play defense. He was really physical. I mean, really, really impressive players. Another guy who got a lot of time in the midfield who was a senior was Sebastian Manny. A lot of physical play. It's like if you wanted somebody to win the ball back and hurt somebody at the same time, Sebastian Manny was your guy. So there were those 3 seniors there. Another starter who was in the midfield was Jackson Dubrulle. He started, I think, like 13, 14 games in the middle there. We also had Miles Green was playing in the midfield. He was a sub there. We'll talk a little bit more about him later, as well as Jackson. And then Tiago Fantaselli, right? Got some time in the midfield. He's coming back. But, you know, everything's changed now. And now what's happened is that Sharon is gone. He's graduated. He's off to Keene State. Mike Fortin's gone. He's off to Maine, going to college. Sebastian Manny is gone. He's graduated. Dubrulle has been moved back to the defense, it looks like. It also looks like Green is going to be our starting keeper. So basically, of all the guys who played in the midfield last year, the only one left is Tiago Fantaselli. So we need to talk about him, and the other guy who's being moved back to midfield is Nick Mason. So we'll start talking about Nick, say a little bit about Tiago. Mason, if you've been following Goffstown soccer, he's been a striker the whole time that he's been here, and he's been a starting striker. I mean, he was a starting striker alongside Sam Heidenreich on the state championship team in 2016. Last year, he was our featured striker. You know, he scored, I believe it was 10 goals in 16 games. What you get with Nick is size, enormous strength, speed, and a lot of athleticism. I think he's going to be an enormous physical challenge for whomever has to cover that guy because he's immensely strong, and he spent the entire summer working construction. So I really like Nick a lot. I think one thing that's really interesting about him compared to other strikers is that he is always aware of where his teammates are. He's not a selfish striker. Sometimes I wish he was a little more selfish, but he's going to be a real challenge. But he's being moved back now to offensive center mid. Looks like that's going to be his spot, at least for now. The other player who has some experience from playing last season is Thiago Fantaselli, and I know Jared agrees with me on this one. I think Fantaselli has enormous upside. I mean, he's a big kid, he's a strong kid, he's fairly fast. We've seen him. He has a good touch. He can, when he sets his mind to it, he can touch the ball really well. And we've seen some spectacular finishes from him. I remember he had a volley against Bo last year. It was absolutely amazing. The one problem, though, is a little bit with Fantaselli's head. I think he plays somewhat underconfidently. And I think one of the most important tasks that Coach Lovering can undertake this season is to allow Fantaselli to get his mojo back, because I think he could do a world of good for this team if he played with more confidence, went into those 50-50 balls and did some of that kind of work. But that's it. So really the only guys who are coming back from last season who are in the midfield is Nick Mason, who's been moved back from striker, and Fantaselli, who was a midfielder last year, who started a couple of games, got some time otherwise. But now we've got a whole bunch of younger guys in the midfield that we need to talk about. So
So Joey Mcneill on the JV team last year had a very good year. He was actually one of the people that would take a lot of the free kicks, any of the set pieces, and he scored quite a few goals with them. He played a lot in the back, so in the center, so he could distribute the ball well and gave people a lot of opportunities. So he had a very good season last year, and it looks like that's kind of the position that he's stepping into so far this year in the games that we've seen. And then the newcomer, who I don't think either one of us had seen much, has been Ronnie Morgan, who's played very, very well and kept a lot of poise for a freshman in some pretty competitive games that they've played so far.
Yeah, no, he's got very good foot skills. And you know what? Unlike a lot of the other freshmen, he's kind of solidly built. It's not like he's going to get blown over or anything like that. I mean, he's still not terribly tall, but he's a solid kid. He's got really good foot skills. And the thing I like about guys who have foot skills is that they can look up and survey the field because they're confident about having the ball at their feet. So
and he wasn't afraid to play with contact. And so he was getting a lot of contact, and he could play right through it. Yeah. And I think that's what sometimes the very skilled players, Mike Fortin when he was a freshman, he worked hard, but I mean he could get kind of pushed out of there a little bit. Yeah. I don't think they're going to be able to do the same thing.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So Joey and Ronnie. And Jasper
Klaus, who had, again, I think he started a little bit, he was a freshman last year on the JV team with a lot of sophomores. The JV team had a ton of sophomores.
Right.
But every time he came in, his effort level was really high, and he played a lot of midfield. Again, he played some up front as well, and he was a big contributor when he started to really understand how they wanted him to play. And again, so far what we've seen this year is the same thing. He's always out there hustling and trying to distribute the ball.
He's a smart kid, and one of the things I noticed compared with last year is he's a lot better about shielding the ball with his body than he was. He's not like a big, strong kid, but he was getting pushed around a lot last year. This year, I think he's a lot better about that, and I think he sees the field pretty well. So I think he can make some really good contributions at the midfield as well. Obviously, Randy Lovering doesn't usually take sophomores onto this team, so he has seen something, right? And that something is pretty important.
Yeah, and there were a lot of juniors too, so he he brought them up, I'm sure, for a reason. And so far, I think he's done pretty well in the preseason.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So the midfield completely remodeled, just like the defense. The defense has been completely remodeled. Last year, we finished the season with Andrew Lazat at right back and Caleb Gorton at left back, and Trevor Santoro with Max Lajeunesse at center back. And Max Lajeunesse and Andrew Lazat, they graduated. They're off to college. Well, I think we're really going to miss those guys. Andrew Lazat, this might tell you something about our defense. Andrew Lazat was not a tall kid. He was not a big kid. He was not a fast kid. He just lived by his wits on the field. I think he really grew in that position as the season went on. I thought he did a really good job. Max Lajeunesse, likewise, not a tall guy, not a terribly big guy. Pretty strong, though, for a guy his size, and also very, very quick. And I don't think I saw a single time last season that he was beat by a striker one-on-one.
Or
He's
that he couldn't catch up.
That he couldn't.
Was
yeah, he was quick. So both those guys have gone. They both graduated. They've gone off to greener pastures. The other player, Trevor Santoro, started last season as a sophomore, and a very young sophomore. When the season started in August last year, he was still 14.
Wow.
And again, not a big guy, not a terribly strong guy, pretty good turn of speed. But the thing that was really good about Trevor Santoro was that he knew how to read plays and he knew how to get where he needed to go. And he was often physically outmatched by other players who were older, by 3 years, something like that. I remember when he was matched up against Max Elcesser at Bow, and that was a tough matchup. And you know what? It took until overtime for Elcesser to finally score. So Trevor Santoro, unfortunately, while he was playing for GPS New Hampshire, he was at a Memorial Day tournament, and he was in a collision. He tore his ACL. He tore his meniscus. He had surgery in July. He is not playing soccer until next July.
Yeah, that's a big loss.
A bummer.
Yeah.
It's a bummer for him. I know he would do anything to be out on the field. It's a bummer for the team. It's I think it's a bummer because I wanted to see him play. I mean, He's good, and he would have been somebody that could really anchor a defense. So he's out. So the only guy who was a starter last year on defense was Caleb Gorton, who's coming back, and he's a lock on left back. And what's kind of funny is I don't think he became a starter last season, like a regular starter at left back, until like 3/4 of the way through the season. I know Coach Levering was a little frustrated with his defense last year, is shuffling guys around, like musical chairs back there. And I think he just threw Gorton out there like, I'm just going to throw that guy out there, see what he can do. And, Gorton, he made a couple of rookie mistakes. He had a tendency to trip people right outside the box. Better outside the box than in, but I mean, but it was obvious he had so much upside and so much potential. And, he's fairly tall. He was the tallest guy on our defense, which isn't probably saying much last year. We had a lot of short guys who were quick, but Gorton was tall. He is fast. He is aggressive. He's very good in the air. And what I really liked about him, and I saw this in evidence in the Lebanon game, is that he was really good at containing other players. He didn't overrun the ball. He didn't stick his foot out. He didn't poke his foot out, do any of that kind of stuff. He knew that, like, if I stay between this guy and the goal, he can't shoot, right? And he was very, very good about that. So I'm glad he's coming back. He's going to be a good guy to have back there. But, that's only one guy. The rest of the defense has to be rebuilt. And the only other veteran starter from last year who's joining him back there is Jackson Dubrulle. Dubrulle was a holding mid last season. Looks like he's going to be some kind of a center back this year. And I don't think it's because of his defensive acumen. And I see you laughing. I mean, don't underestimate him. I think he can play defense, but I don't think that's the reason he's back there. I think it's to kind of jumpstart the counterattack that he's back there. So I think he brings a couple of qualities to the backfield. One of them is that he sees the field really well. He sees how the play develops. He understands where the ball has to go, and he's a very good passer under pressure. The third quality he brings is not terribly useful for defense. He's probably going to be taking the corners and a lot of the free kicks this season. So, and I think the rest of the team is going to be thankful because in the time it takes him to jog from the backfield to the corner to take the corner kick, they can get a breather.
You're always a little tougher on your own
yeah,
kid.
Right,
He seemed to get back there all right.
Oh, no, I know, but I think that the rest of the team's happy because they can take a break while he's trotting out there. But between Dubrulle and Gorton, I mean, those are
and
just
Connor
two guys.
Fitzpatrick too.
I was just going to get to him. Those are two starters from last year, and then we've got a couple of other guys who are in the mix who are on the team last year. That would be David Trinka, who started a couple of games, was brought up from JV in the middle of last season, and then Connor Fitzpatrick got a number of minutes back there. But then there's like a host of people who are coming up from JV who look like they're in the running for defensive spots as well.
Yeah, and some of those players played a lot of defense on JV, and some of them didn't.
Right.
But it looks like this year, Coach Levering so far is going to have 5 backs back there, 4 or 5 anyway. We've seen 5 a lot of times. So I think when you go through the people that are going to be there, Casey Fortho had a very good summer. A lot of the summer programs, when you went over there and watched the games, I thought you could tell that's where Coach Levering was thinking of putting him. He was spending a lot of time back there, and he played more midfield last year than he did back, and so he's made really good progress there. And he's obviously he's a good size. I think you mentioned one of the things that's different this year to last year is I think there's a lot more size.
Right.
Maybe not quite as much speed.
Well, we've
And
traded in speed for size.
Right.
Yeah,
so that's why
right.
you might need one extra person back there, right?
Right.
But Casey has really good size, good foot skills, and honestly, he can move up if he needs to support anybody, because that's where he played. He played a lot of midfield before. Inside of him, you'll know Isaac Borges. He's a big kid. He's as fast as he is.
We're always hardest on our own,
We're
right?
always hardest on our own kid. But one of the things he does do is he does try to pass the ball and play within the system that he's going to play.
And he talks a lot on the field. I know he talks
He
a lot
doesn't
elsewhere.
just talk a lot on the field.
No. He's not just Eddie Haskell off the field, but I mean, he talks a lot
Right.
on the field, and I think you need somebody to kind of help organize back there.
Yeah.
There are a number of talkers back there.
Yeah, and I think it's really good because it's a little bit different defense than they're used to playing, and honestly, they're going to need people behind them because they're going to get beat by some people at Division I with a lot more speed.
And I think as some of them are not terribly fast, they're going to have to cooperate a little more as a unit to kind of, and they need to talk to make that happen.
And honestly, I think that unit so far that we've seen, they've been fairly organized for a new group that are playing new positions. So that's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun to watch. There's obviously a lot of things they need to work on.
Oh, sure,
but
absolutely.
it was a little bit better than I think we all expected coming right out of the gate.
Well, and the thing is, though, if you think about it, Dubrulle, Foytho, and Borges, who are going to be somewhere in the middle there in the mix like that, I mean, they're actually friends. I mean, they know each other really well. So I think that's going to be kind of something that holds them together, maybe more so than otherwise. But also...
so Renaud Pelletier really had, he's a baseball player, but he also plays soccer. And last year, there probably wasn't a kid on the pitch that hustled more than he did. He was always running. And this year, it looks like in the position that he's going to be playing, he's got a lot of running that he's going to be doing. So he had a very good year last year. Not so much as a goal scorer. He played a lot of defense, played a lot of midfield, which I think is going to help him a lot this year. But he's got a good motor. He's always working hard. He's gotten a little bit bigger, but he's by no means big.
Right.
But with the rest of the size on that back line, I think he's a great asset up there as well.
Well, there are 2 points one point in particular that you bring up that I think that is really important is that a lot of the guys who are in the backfield right now have experience of playing the midfield. Gorton was tried out as a midfielder last year before he got moved back on defense, and there's a guy who's got a motor as well. Right. Super aggressive, is willing to push up, can come back. Can get involved in the offense, does get involved in the offense now. Foytho, a former midfielder, Dubrulle, who played holding mid last year. Right. Renaud again. The whole crowd. So I think these are guys who can handle themselves, pushing forward, cooperating with the offense, and doing that kind of thing.
Whatever the play dictates.
So maybe they might not keep a lot of goals out, but maybe they can help score some goals. I don't know. We'll just have to see how that works out.
Well, so far in the jamborees and the games they've had, they haven't given up a straight goal. It's either been on corners or on penalty kicks.
Right.
So far, and the competition hasn't been the same they're going to see. But that's still a lot of soccer. They played 3 one-hour games in the jamboree, and they played I don't know how long the scrimmage was, but
against John Stark.
Yeah, against John Stark.
Right.
And they didn't give up a lot of goals, but.
It's kind of surprising to me, though, that they gave up a corner because now one of the reasons you trade in speed for size is preventing that from happening, right? But, I totally agree with you. We haven't been challenged to this same degree that we will be, but it's a good start so far.
Yeah.
No sort of catastrophic breakdowns or anything like that.
Coach Levern may have a different opinion of that.
Well, I think, his you're optimistic, I'm pessimistic, and I think it's Randy's job to be, even more pessimistic, to kind of drive the boys forward, to kind of rise to the occasion. So that brings us to goalie, and that's a simple task, right, to talk about it. There's only going to be one goalie, right, and it's going to be Miles Green.
Then you'll have Devin that's coming up.
Well, that's true, right, yeah. But, Miles is the starter. And this is a guy who's built to be a goalie. He's 6'3", 6'4", something like that. And I was looking at him the other day, and I think I was looking at his Adam's apple, and I'm 6'1" and a half. But this is a guy with a wingspan of a condor too. You're not going to get a lot of the high shots in there, without him. And he's got great hand-eye coordination. He's a basketball player. He's a baseball player. But it's more than that. He times his runs off the line really, really well. Gets himself big. does all that kind of stuff. Really good goalie. I think part of the plan is, it's like, okay, we got a lot of defenders back there, and we plan to have the goalie stand on his head and make a lot of stops, right?
So far, so good.
So far, so good, yeah.
We've certainly seen that. And the biggest difference I've seen, and you got to remember, Miles was part of that championship team,
right,
and had a phenomenal playoff.
Very, very good saves then.
But even compared to then, he's much more aggressive now,
yeah,
and he's much more vocal.
Yeah, and he needs to be.
And he needs to be, because he's got a lot of inexperienced people in front of him.
Right.
And so it's actually been a lot of fun to watch. And honestly, he saved their bacon on more than a few cases. We say they haven't given up any goals. It wasn't because the other team didn't necessarily have some good opportunities.
Yeah. But I think, it's not a bad unit, man, because a lot of those guys in the back, right, and Miles, they know each other very, very well. They've got good, they're good friends.
And they've been playing with each other for quite a while.
Well, that was something I was going to bring up later. I think that's an important point about this particular team, is that they've got a lot of experience with each other. All right, so that kind of covers sort of the lineup and the changes of the lineup. One of the things I think you can see is that this team has been completely broken down and built back up again. A lot of people shifting around, a lot of new guys, a lot of stuff going on. And that kind of brings us to the conversation of okay, so we're moving up to Division 1. So Goffstown was playing in Division 2 last year. We've done fairly well in the last few years at Division 2, but now we're at Division 1. We were forced against our will. Here we are. So I know you and I have our disagreements over this. They haven't gotten violent yet, but so tell us, Joe, what do you think is going to happen to Goffstown High in Division 1, and why do you think that?
This is what I think, and I think
I know. I wrote here, Joe explains his indefensible position that we will go 500.
That's how Hugh puts it. But I actually think there's a chance to go 500. And what it really reminds me of is when the first year we started taping games for GTV, we had Bo that was moving up from Division 3 to Division 2. And I remember we played them early in the year, and you could tell, although they had some talent, they just weren't quite ready for the speed and how physical that move up in division was going to be. But as that year progressed, they started to get accustomed to that, and they started to improve. And I think you're going to see the same thing with Goffstown. I mean, especially our schedule's a little bit tough early on. We're going to play some of the best teams in the state, and I think those are going to really be some learning experiences. But by the end of the year, I think they can play with most of these teams. And even though we've only played one Division 1 team in the Jamboree, it was Salem. I think we played with them. We worked. In most of the games we've seen so far, we worked as hard or harder than the team we're playing. And I think you also get a little bit of that, we're playing that team that just moved up from Division 2, and maybe you don't always get other people's best efforts. Yeah. So I think the combination of those things is why, I think it's certainly possible for them to be a 500 team and hopefully, sneak into the playoffs. Last year, when you look through the standings, there were teams with 5 wins that made the playoffs.
You don't. You don't need to make. You don't to get to the playoffs. You don't need to make 500. You could do way, way below that. So
I think there's a chance for that. Now, obviously, a lot of good things would have to take place, and injuries are a big thing. But I think that's actually one area where this team has an advantage over last year's team, because even if they have some injuries, they've got a lot more depth. Maybe they don't have the same high-level skill as the players that have left, but they've got a lot of players that can fill in if they need to. And I think totally those are the reasons that I think they're going to be deep. There'll be a lot of deep teams, but I don't think the lower half of Division 1 is incredibly deep either. So
no, I would completely agree with that.
So that's my indefensible position.
Well,
and I'll be right, just like that West game.
Well, I knew you were going to say that. I don't know if you're in good company or bad company, but Jackson Dubrulle thinks we're going to go 7-7-2 this year.
That Jackson's a smart kid. Must get it from his mom.
And Miles Green thinks we're going to go 6 wins. So anyway, are you a good news first or bad news first kind of guy?
I always like the bad news first.
Okay, so am I, because I figure if the bad news is not so bad, then the good news is going to be fine, right? Exactly. So, so the bad news first. So this team is very young. We've got 5 seniors on this team, but probably in all likelihood only 3 of them are going to start. Then we've got a sophomore, a freshman, and the rest of them are juniors, right? So this is a very young team, and it's not a terribly experienced team. I think age and experience are not the same thing necessarily. Right. But if you take a look at sort of the experience of this team, right? So only 2 of the 5 seniors are on the team played last year on varsity. The freshman didn't play, the sophomore didn't play, obviously, and a very good chunk of the juniors are on the team did not play on varsity last year. We could go through the roster. We don't have to do that, right? But the one startling fact that frightens me a little bit is that do you want to guess how many players on the team this year were starters last year from the beginning of the season to the end?
It's probably not a big number.
I think it's 3. So I think it's Nick Mason. Nick Mason's definitely a starter. Jackson Dubrulle was a starter from the beginning to the end, and I think David Gibson was probably a starter from beginning to end. That's it.
Or at starter minutes anyway.
Yeah,
if he wasn't. Right.
Yeah. There's only 3 guys who started from beginning season to the end who are still on the team now. So a lot of guys who were starters by the end of the season, right? So I think there's a certain lack of experience. I think. This is the kind of team. This kind of cuts both ways. This is the kind of team. We don't have any huge stars. Not like we were reading the Union Leader article. That had the sort of write up about what the season was going to look like. And I've seen some of those guys play that they were mentioning, and we don't have anybody like that. But we do have a number of fairly solid, above average players. And some pretty good players. Who could, if they cohere together, could actually play fairly decently. But I think that's the bad news, right? Is that we just don't have a lot of experience. We don't have a lot of age.
And we're moving up a division.
Right. Well, if we were in Division 2, I'd say this might not be so bad.
Right.
We could probably at least go 500. Probably even do better.
Than that, I would say.
Well, depending on some of the other teams.
But you're negative.
I am negative, right? But then that means that you lower expectations. You feel a lot better when things turn out. So that's, those are, I think, some pretty big issues. On the flip side, the good news, there's good news here, right? I told you, see, that's not so bad. The good news is, first of all, I think this team is going to have pretty good chemistry. Especially the junior class, the class of 2020, which dominates this team, right? I think 11 of the 17 guys on this team are juniors. They have been together for a very, very long time. Almost all of them have played for the old Tri-Town United, which I understand is now Goffstown United. They played together at one time or another.
Either that or futsal.
Or futsal. Not all of them are like the best of friends, although a number of them are pretty good friends. But they're pretty tight. I think they respect each other. They like each other. They know each other. They're willing to stick up for each other. And I think that spirit has kind of pervaded the team. It makes me think a little bit about the at the Jamboree when we were playing Salem, and that thug attacked Jasper Klaus, right? And clobbered him, and then Nick Mason was giving the guy the business in a heartbeat. And I think a month ago Nick Mason didn't even know who Jasper Klaus was. But it's hey, we stick together. We're going to fight together. I think there's a stronger sense of community on this team, and I think it can translate into hard work and people kind of holding together, and a team that is cohesive, I think, can be more effective necessarily than a bunch of guys who are superstars. So I think there's that part of it. And then the other part of it, I think we've talked about this in the past, is the very nature of Division I soccer. Division I soccer is characterized by a bunch of really, really good teams and a bunch of really terrible teams and almost nothing in the middle. So I think we were kind of looking at this a little bit earlier.
So we're striving for the middle.
Well, here, look, last year there were 9 teams in Division I that had 11 wins or more in a 16-game season. There were 8 teams that had 5 wins or less in a 16-game season, and then there were only 2 teams in between. So I think, that's kind of good news for us. I think we could be the team that's at sort of at the top of the bottom or the bottom of the middle. And I think, as you said earlier,
top of the bottom sounds.
Yeah, the top of the bottom. I don't know, the bottom of the middle. I don't know. Somewhere in there. But last year, the record that was required to make the playoffs was 5-10-1. I think we can do that. I don't, even if we get 6 wins, I think we're going to be just south of 500. I think we got 6 or 7 wins. I think we can make the playoffs. And we might be one and done, but it'll be a good experience. And then next year.
And you never know when you hit the playoffs.
Well, I know, but we would be at the bottom of the bottom of the seed. But who knows? We got the playoffs, one and done. Everybody's happy. Everybody has a good time, and everybody recharges for next year. We have a good experience, and then this is a classic rebuilding year. Let's not think we're going to get a ton of hardware. I think next year is going to be our year. But this is a good season. We can have a good season. Get the guys to learn how to play soccer. Have them have a good time. Have a good experience. And then next year is going to be a year that we're going to have maybe more results. So I don't know. That's my
not
case.
That bad.
So I'm saying 6 wins, 7 wins. Miles Green says 6 wins. So I don't know. I think I'm in good company too. So maybe we should just need to mention about next week. We have games next week.
We do, yep.
So the opening game of the season is against Portsmouth on August 28th. I think the game starts at 4:30 in Portsmouth.
Another former Division II team.
I was just going to say, and that was a team that we played last year.
Right.
We tied them 2-2 in overtime. And you know what? Portsmouth, if you looked at their record, they were not that good last year. I mean, they didn't have a very good record, but when we played them, they were tough. They were tough. I mean,
they played better on the turf too.
Yeah, well, they didn't move the ball terribly well, but they gave a lot of effort.
Right.
It was a tough nut to crack, tough set teams, and I know that we lost to them in overtime at JV. So
right.
This could be a real test for Goffstown on Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday, August 28th. So there's that game. So you know what? Go to Portsmouth. Watch the game. Make a night of it. Go out to dinner in Portsmouth. Portsmouth is a very nice place. It reminds me a lot of Goffstown, except larger. I'm just kidding about that. Goffstown's still a nice place. But if you don't want to drive out to Portsmouth, you can come to Goffstown High on Friday because that's when the home opener is. That is going to be a 4 o'clock game, August 31st against Manchester Central. And that is going to be a test because Manchester Central is among the teams that the union leader has tapped as a contender for the Division I championship of the state. So if you want to see how Goffstown fares against some pretty rugged competition, and I know some of the kids on that team, they're very good, come to Goffstown, 4 o'clock, August 31st on Friday.
And of course, if you can't make any of the games, they'll be available on GTV. We're going to hope to tape all of them if we can.
Yeah.
And certainly we know we're going to get the first couple. We've already got those.
Yeah, 19 games. We did 19 games last season. 16 regular games, 3 postseason games. We're kind of shooting to see if we can do as many as we can this year. But we also have day jobs, sort of. So anyway, I think we're done here. So for GTV, over and out, I'm Hugh Dubrulle. That's Joe Borges. And Jared Green is behind the camera.